Canada set ambitious new immigration targets recently, but numbers just out from Statistics Canada suggest that while Canada may attract plenty of newcomers, we don't seem to be doing such a good job keeping them. Daniel Bernhard is the CEO of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, and he joins us now for more. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
All right, so this is the story. Immigrants who come to Canada and become permanent residents don't rush to become citizens. So according to Statistics Canada, in 2001, 75% of permanent residents became citizens within 10 years of their arrival. In 2016, that number was 60%. In 2021, that number was down to 46%. Do we know why this is the case?
We don't know. We can speculate. There are many theories from application fees, processing times, underemployment, isolation, people not being able to have fun and enjoy the beautiful and enjoyable parts of Canada that make life worth living here. But I think the fact that we don't know, actually, for me, is the more revealing statistic, because nobody's really checked. And I think this speaks really volumes about Canada's attitude towards immigrants. We've assumed for so long that since we're not an officially xenophobic country, and because we have such a long tradition of immigration here, and successful immigration, that people will just want to keep coming, and that their lives will just continue to be fine and good, that the future will just be like the past. What this data, I think, starts to reveal is that actually maybe that history of immigration, that legacy of citizenship is coming undone. The machine is starting to slow down. What does that mean, not just for immigrants' condition here, but about the country and about our future? So the fact that nobody's checked, actually, for me, is by far the more revealing thing. And we're now working pretty feverishly to try and see if we can get to the bottom of this, because the implications for Canada, at least in my opinion, are going to be pretty stark if we can't reverse this trend.
Data, data, data. Very important stuff. In terms of the conditions themselves that you're mentioning, what are they?
Well, I think that we're finding a couple of major trends. So first and foremost, the profile of the typical immigrant who's coming here has changed a lot. So when my parents came to Canada in the 1970s, one had a high school degree, one didn't yet. They spoke very little English. And so, my dad, for example, saw no problem in getting up on Monday morning in Toronto and driving to Belleville, where he worked in a factory, until Friday and coming home when my mom finished her studies. They had no immediate expectations of home ownership or having a senior executive job or anything like that. Today, of course, Canada's attracting a far higher caliber of talent from around the world, people with higher skills and education, credentials, very advanced job experience. And of course, with that come many quality of life benefits, people who were homeowners, people who had domestic help in many cases, depending on the country that they came from, where that can be relatively affordable. And so coming to Canada, instead of everything being a future possibility and everything looking up, in fact, many are taking steps back and are wondering now aloud whether that step back will be permanent and whether it's worth it to sort of stick it out and see if you can retain your or regain your status. So I think the caliber of immigrants are changing a lot, and our narrative of who immigrants are has not evolved commensurately. We still have this idea of $5 in your pocket, put your head down, work hard, etc. That was my parents. That was many people. There are still people who arrive that way, but many, many who don't. And until our settlement services, our economic attitudes, our hiring practices can adjust to the reality of who the contemporary immigrant is, we'll continue to fall short here.
I want to stick on the who a little bit. Historically, this has changed in terms of where people are coming from to Canada. Do we have an idea of where most of our permanent, or rather say our newcomers, are coming from?
I mean, India, China, and the Philippines is the short answer. Will make up more than half in any given year. Obviously, it fluctuates. But the origins of newcomers have changed throughout our history. There was, English, Scottish, Irish. Then, we moved to other parts of Europe. Ukrainians, obviously, populated large parts of the West. Now there's people coming from Southeast Asia and East Asia. The future looks likely to be more African. I think that this is part of Canada's interesting history, is our ability to welcome people from around the world, so long as they're committed to their future being Canadian. This is a central core of our identity. We can talk about it perhaps later. the citizenship numbers, in my opinion, are alarming because they call into question whether people are actually committed to their future being Canadian. That's the major disruption that we're starting to observe. In terms of other demographics, newcomers tend to be almost twice as likely as the average Canadian to hold a bachelor's degree. They are, on balance, far younger. Half of Canadians are, over 41, and newcomers are, 80% are under that age. So they're younger, better educated. They come with, few brand loyalties and
Right.
few preconceptions and very rich prospects. So much of our country has been built on putting their talent and energies to use for the purpose of Canada. Citizenship is one marker of that intention to devote yourself and your life.
You had said that the numbers are alarming, and you've once said that it's shocking. But when I read through those numbers, the trajectory has always been sort of moving downwards for quite some time as well. So should it be really shocking or alarming?
Well, it's a 20-year trend.
Right.
I think it's still alarming. Earlier I said, we haven't checked, so we're all kind of a bit surprised. I think what this means, though, is that the contingent factors like application backlogs for COVID, or whether it's a liberal or conservative government, these are not really central here. There's something bigger going on. So I think the bigger thing that's going on is the declining market value of being Canadian. That's what the data are saying to us. Being Canadian is becoming less desirable. That's concerning to me, and I imagine it'd be concerning to many of your viewers as well.
Very interesting stuff. I want to get an idea of how the Institute for Canadian Citizenship is sort of helping fix that. What are the ways in which your institute is trying to make Canada more understandable to immigrants?
So our organization was founded by the Right Honourable Adrienne Clarkson after she left Rideau Hall as Governor General, and John Ralston Saul, the acclaimed writer, academic. And Madam Clarkson's story, I think, is important. I'll tell you why. I mean, she arrived in Canada as a refugee and rose to become head of state. I can't think of another country where that's even legal, let alone likely. And in Canada, actually, I would go as far as to say it was even unremarkable. It was normal. That, I think, says a lot about us, about what we're willing to accept. And if people are saying they'll commit to Canada and being Canadian, that literally anything can happen. And so the Institute was started to keep that dream alive, I think, to ensure that a country that would appoint a refugee as head of state was not a country of the past. And so we do a few things. We have 3 core programs. So first of all, we celebrate that journey of citizenship. We host enhanced citizenship ceremonies across the country, which include opportunities for new citizens to interact with Indigenous people, many for the first time, include artistic components, make it more of a celebration and not just go to your government building, swear your oath, and go home. We do public policy research, unearthing some of the data, for example, that we've been talking about today. And also looking at other factors that may knock people off that track from arrival to citizenship. And that's both in the legal sense, but also in your heart, in the sense of beliefs and behaviors. And citizenship for me is this determination that this is my place and these are my people. Having the passport is one indicator of that, but it's a state of personal belief, of belonging. And the way that we try to intervene on scale to cultivate that sense of belonging is through a program we have called the Canoe Access Pass. This is really just a fantastic program. It's been going on for quite a while. It used to give new Canadian citizens free entry to over 1,400 national parks, museums, science centers, et cetera, for a family of 4 as a way of saying, welcome to Canada. What we've realized, of course, is that many people are taking a long time to become citizens. So about a year ago, we opened Canoe to every permanent resident within their first 5 years of arrival. And this is a transformative, experiential welcome to make Canada easy to love and harder to leave. People are forging connections with each other. They're discovering new hobbies. They're traveling the country. There's very generous discounts from Air Canada and Via Rail. And so this is a way for newcomers to have a VIP welcome to Canada and for all of Canada to participate in that welcome. Canoe is currently being used by over 100,000 people, and that will only continue to grow.
All right. I want to pick up on something that you had mentioned. With the English, French, and Indigenous split, Canada was never truly one thing. With increased multiculturalism, it is becoming increasingly many, many things. Is there a problem trying to explain Canada to new immigrants?
I think there's a problem if you think there's a need to try. Canada has been notoriously difficult to pin down. As we were discussing a little bit earlier, though, I think that this idea of Canada being open to immigrants, not just coming here to live, but to build their homes and their families and their businesses and their futures as Canadian, is actually, in my opinion, the central tenet of the Canadian identity. So there are lots of countries around the world where it's cold, lots of people play hockey, lots of people are nice, lots of people have subsidized healthcare. There's only one agenda, of course. But this idea of allowing people to become citizens, to join your team, has been in the discourse in Canada for centuries. It's originally an Indigenous tradition where Europeans were welcomed here to share the richness of the land. Of course, that welcome was betrayed, and we know all too well about that. But that tradition, thankfully, has survived into modern Canada. And you can look at political speeches from, Wilfrid Laurier in 1904 talking about this. Louis Lafontaine was talking about this in the 1840s, about Canada being a place where no matter the land of your ancestors, the land of your future shall be Canada, and that this will be a heritage that we transmit to our children, that their future, like ours, will be Canadian. This is a really central idea. It's in the soil, it's in the air, and it's one of the things that I think makes Canada truly, truly different to all of the other developed countries where this is still contentious. For us, it's central and foundational. It's part of the reason why these numbers are so concerning to me. This is a long legacy of citizenship. If it's being interrupted or questioned, the implications, I think, are perhaps far greater than what people may assume.
All right, I am going to pull up a pretty recent and interesting example of how complicated this country is. We may not assume that this is where this example is coming from, but this is a snippet of Julie Black's performance of Canada's national anthem at this weekend's NBA All-Star Weekend, which was in Salt Lake City, Utah. Let's have a look.
Oh, Canada, our home on a native land.
So there you go, on native land, not and native land. How do you think new immigrants are contending with this part of Canadian history, and whether it's something that they should concern themselves with?
So we held an event in Calgary in October. There's been an event series called the LaFontaine Baldwin Lectures that our organization has hosted for many, many years. And in October, Governor General Mary Simon spoke about immigration and reconciliation. And these things are in tension, as the performance just showed. We wanted to see if we could get to the bottom of it. And one of the things that the Governor General pointed out is, like I said earlier, that actually Indigenous peoples' initial response to Europeans' arrival was, there's plenty of space here, there's plenty to go around, and the Europeans would all be dead had the Indigenous people not taught them how to survive the winter. It's a harsh place. So this tradition of welcome goes back a long way. There is, however, a danger, I believe, in Canada. If newcomers don't believe themselves to be implicated in that history, then we're going to have an issue. And we hear from people, understandably, saying, look, I get it, but I didn't put anyone in a residential school. I just came 5 years ago. In fact, I came from a country that was also colonized by the British.
Right.
What we found, however, is that that shared experience creates a lot of very interesting opportunities for solidarity. And in Calgary, the Center for Newcomers, along with the Calgary Foundation, has created this program called Indigenous Education for Newcomers. And you would not believe how well subscribed this is. At our citizenship ceremonies, when there's the reception line at the end, the Indigenous representative, typically an elder, gets the most hugs by far. And people understand they have many more things in common than they do apart. But being Canadian is about not only owning our future and coming to get something, but it's also about being responsible for the past. And we have found that newcomers really understand. They understand racism, they understand discrimination, they understand dispossession, they understand a lot of things that Indigenous people understand. It doesn't have to be explained to them. And they are natural allies in many cases. We find that the newcomers we work with tend to be overwhelmingly supportive of Canada's imperative to recover from all the injustices that have been perpetrated upon Indigenous people in the past.
All right. I want to pull to another study, and it was a recent Lager study. 22% of new Canadians are likely to leave Canada. Again, I feel like you're going to probably point to some of the same things there, but what do you point the reasons behind it?
So there we asked them a little bit more. And they basically said that the issue was they don't make enough money. They talked about cost of living, but of course cost of living is relative to how much you earn, and we're publishing constantly. We just published a report a couple months ago. There's a new one coming out soon about disadvantages that immigrants, especially highly skilled immigrants, face in the labor market. Like I said earlier, the people who are coming have choices. They've got experience. They come with much more pedigree in that sense than my parents and many past generations of newcomers. And so they have also expectations of being able to find their way here. And if they don't find it, they'll look for it somewhere else. I think this really speaks to the kind of central point of this issue, which is that so much of what we're talking about with respect to immigration is not just about immigrants' condition here. This is not a humanitarian question. I mean, that's part of it. But it's about our entire society benefiting. This is an engine of renewal and growth and new ideas and talent and energy that's been driving Canada forward and driving Canada's prosperity for hundreds of years. We have big challenges in healthcare, for example. In Ontario alone, there are an estimated 13,000 people who have a medical degree from another country. Right. Several thousand of them have already passed their Canadian accreditation exams. We are in the midst of a full-blown global healthcare crisis. And these people are saying, put me in, coach, I'm ready. I want to contribute, I want to help, I'm here, I would love to serve Canada in this way. And we're saying, sorry, but no. We'd rather that people wait in line for years than to have you work in our system, even though you've passed all of our exams and standards. So yeah, what does that mean for the doctor? It's terrible, it's discouraging. But also, what does it mean for us, right, who have this talent and it's willing and able and ready to go, and we're saying, no, we'd rather wait in line. So this is just as much about patience as it is about the doctors, and this example can be extrapolated into every other section of the economy, culture. If you look at our famous authors and athletes, newcomers have driven us as a country so far. I mean, the World Cup team is an example that I use. Mm-hmm. Canada's star player came as a refugee. When he shows up to work, he literally wraps himself in the maple leaf. He's decided that this is my place and these are my people, and look what we've achieved as a nation as a result of that. So all of us are implicated in this. And all of us are implicated in this. This is for all of us to try and sort out, because it's our common future that's at stake.
So some new immigrants are leaving, some are turning their backs on Canadian citizenship. Is Canada not as great at immigration as we thought we were? And it's not simply being pro-immigration and saying that you're pro-immigration and thinking that's going to resonate with the rest of the world is enough. Are we not good as what we thought we were?
I think that we are definitely not as good as what we thought we were. But I don't think that's irretrievable. There are a few factors, definitely militating in our favor. I mean, first and foremost, relative to other developed countries in the world, we remain still a very positive place for immigrants to come. We're now alarmed to the point where it's current affairs TV worthy to talk about the fact that fewer immigrants are becoming citizens. I've done many interviews about this story in the last couple of days. In fact, my LinkedIn post with this information has been viewed over 230,000 times. And for me, 230 times is a lot, right? So this is really caught on. There are other countries like Germany, for example, where people can live for many generations without becoming a citizen. So relatively speaking, we still maintain an advantage. And in terms of public opinion polling, 70% of Canadians believe that immigration levels are either too low or right. And that includes a majority of people who vote conservative, liberal, every political disposition. That public opinion remains strong. I think the challenge now is how we can translate those values into reality for newcomers, given the changing nature of the people who are coming. And if you think about it this way, we have people who are way better skilled, way better educated, and want to make a go of it here and want to contribute. We have so much more to gain than perhaps we did in the past. Our mindset needs to catch up, though, and I think if that happens, then the reality for newcomers will improve. Their willingness to contribute is unchanged. We just need to catch up with who is actually coming here and create the opportunity for people to contribute to their full potential. And then, boy, we'll be unstoppable.
We have less than a minute here. I'm obviously going to ask you a big question with less than a minute. In terms of solutions, you talk about the mindset. That's one thing, but policies is the other. Those solutions lie with government, both provincial and federal. What do you think needs to be done?
So I think government has a role to play, but I don't want to place too much emphasis on government, because government didn't tell someone they couldn't have a job because they didn't have Canadian experience. Government didn't jack up the price of your rent necessarily. So government needs to, I think, have a plan first and foremost about when you arrive, where's your SIM card going to come from? Where's your doctor going to come from? You know, these kinds of things I think could be definitely improved. But all of us, especially employers, I think need to realize, look, people are complaining that there's not enough skilled labor to run their businesses, and yet we have highly skilled immigrants driving taxis proverbially. That labor shortage isn't real, but we need to understand newcomers' potential. And if we do that, we can deploy that potential in amazing ways. That's how Canada's past was built, and I truly believe that our future prosperity will lie in the same direction. All the potential's there. We just need to put it to work.
Daniel, really great having you on the program. This is really fascinating stuff. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.